You know, in video games, there is always that one specific level.
Oh, yeah. The difficulty spike.
Exactly. Like you've been coasting along, you're picking up skills, feeling pretty good about yourself, you beat the mini-bosses, and then, well, you step into a new room, the door's locked behind you, and the music changes.
You've hit the ultimate boss battle.
Right. Suddenly, everything you thought you knew just isn't enough, and you are hopelessly stuck.
And the difficulty curve, it doesn't just spike in those moments. It actually becomes a completely different game requiring an entirely different set of mechanics.
Yeah.
Like what worked in level 1 gets you absolutely obliterated in level 10.
And if you are listening right now, whether you are prepping for a master's thesis or fighting the good fight in a PhD program, or honestly, just someone whose job requires synthesizing massive, complex reports for your executive team, you are probably staring down the barrel of the intellectual equivalent of that boss battle right now.
The literature review.
It's the dreaded literature review. Today we are doing a deep dive into an expert guide that breaks down the most agonizing, graduation-delaying, career-stalling mistakes people make when writing these things. And the statistics on this are just staggering.
They really are.
Over 40% of graduate students say the literature review is the absolute hardest part of their entire academic journey. It is the #1 thing that keeps them stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is the crucible. And the reason it feels so paralyzing is because it requires this massive and honestly very uncomfortable psychological transition.
Uncomfortable, how?
Well, up until this point in your academic or professional life, you have largely been rewarded for being a passive absorber of knowledge.
Right, like sitting in a lecture hall taking notes.
Exactly. Your job was to read the textbook, remember what it said, and repeat it back accurately on a test or maybe in a summary email. But a literature review demands that you become an active creator of knowledge.
Which is a totally different muscle.
Completely. You are no longer just reporting on what the experts said. You are evaluating them, finding their flaws, and, figuring out where their collective blind spots are.
And that transition from passive to active, that is where the very first major trap comes from. Our sources call it the laundry list approach, or the serial summary.
Oh, I see this one all the time.
I always think of it like dumping a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle onto your living room table, pointing at the massive pile of loose cardboard and saying, "Hey, look at my beautiful puzzle."
Yeah, you're showing the reader all the pieces, but you are flat out refusing to actually put them together.
Right.
It reads like a chronological roll call. Smith in 2019 found X Jones in 2020, discovered Y Brown in 2021, noted Z.
It's exhausting to read.
It really is. As a reader or an examiner, you are just sitting there waiting for the point. It is just a list of disconnected facts.
Okay, but let's look at this from the perspective of a tired grad student or maybe an overwork analyst at 2 a.m. Doesn't that laundry list at least serve a basic function?
What do you mean?
Well, it proves to the examiner or the boss that I did the reading.
Right.
If I summarize 30 papers in chronological order, I'm showing my work.
I mean, sure, it proves you're illiterate, and it proves you have access to a database. But it fails entirely to prove that you can think critically.
Ah, so it's about the synthesis.
Exactly. When you hand in a laundry list, you are essentially asking the examiner or the executive to do the heavy lifting of figuring out how Smith, Jones, and Brown actually relate to one another. You are outsourcing the synthesis to the reader.
Which is a terrible idea if you want to pass.
Mm-hmm.
So to fix this, to actually put the puzzle together, we have to stop grouping sources by author and start grouping them by theme or concept.
Yes, this is crucial.
And our sources offer a fantastic, highly actionable tool for this called the synthesis matrix. Instead of just writing down notes on a legal pad, you create a spreadsheet.
A simple grid.
Right. Each row represents a different author or study you've read, and each column represents a specific theme, variable, or methodology.
Let's walk through how you actually populate that matrix, because that is where the magic really happens.
Let's do.
Say you're reading a dense 40-page academic paper on remote work productivity. The author spends 15 pages detailing their survey methodology, their participant demographics, the statistical software they use.
The really dry stuff.
Exactly. In your matrix, under a column labeled Impact on Deep Work, you do not summarize those 15 pages.
Good, because no one wants to read that.
Right. You extract the one core finding. For instance, mandatory camera-on meetings decrease deep work by 20%. You drop that single refined nugget into the cell and you move on. You leave the rest of the paper behind.
Wow, that requires a lot of discipline. You have to be willing to ignore like 95% of a paper if it doesn't fit your thematic columns.
It hurts at first, but it is necessary. And the payoff happens when you sit down to write. The rule of the synthesis matrix is that you read vertically to populate it, but you write horizontally across the columns.
Okay, wait, unpack that for a second. Read vertically, write horizontally.
So when you draft a paragraph, you aren't looking at one author's row. You are looking down a single thematic column.
Oh, I get it. This physical structure basically forces you to write sentences that compare and contrast multiple studies at once.
Exactly. Because you are staring at a column containing 5 different authors' takes on deep work, you naturally write something like, while Smith argues remote work drives efficiency, Jones suggests this comes at the cost of employee well-being.
And Brown offers a middle ground, depending on the sector.
You've got it. You are creating a narrative.
But even when people start synthesizing successfully like that, they often fall into a secondary trap, and this one seems born out of insecurity.
Overquoting.
Yes, overquoting. You read a sentence in a brilliant paper and you think, well, I can never sound that smart. I'm just going to copy-paste that. And suddenly your review is a Frankenstein monster of block quotes.
The psychological signal you send when you overquote is super detrimental. You might think you're leaning on established authority, but what you are actually signaling to an examiner is that you don't understand the material well enough to explain it in your own words.
Right, you just become a transcriber, not a scholar.
Exactly. This is where the 90-10 rule comes into play.
Which is such a good rule of thumb.
It is. The sources mandate that at least 90% of the text in your literature review must be in your own voice. So, heavily paraphrased and synthesized. You save that remaining 10% for direct quotes only when the original phrasing is exceptionally unique or controversial.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, if an author writes, the data indicates a 14% increase in quarterly revenue due to algorithmic trading. You do not quote that.
Right, because it's just a sterile fact.
Right. You paraphrase it. But if an author writes, algorithmic trading has turned the modern stock exchange into a casino operating at the speed of light, where human intuition is the ultimate liability.
Oh, yeah, that is a phrasing you quote.
Exactly. Altering it would destroy the metaphorical impact.
That makes total sense. Now, let's stay in the weeds of sentence structure for just a moment, because the sources point out an incredibly subtle grammar rule that students constantly mess up.
Verb tense consistency.
Yes. They drift back and forth between past and present tense in the exact same paragraph.
The convention here is strict, but it's very logical. You use the past tense when describing what the authors physically did in their study.
Like Smith conducted a survey, or Jones analyzed the data.
Right. But you use the present tense for what the literature shows or argues. So Smith argues that, or the evidence suggests.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If I use the present tense to describe an argument made by an author in a paper published in, I don't know, 1995,
Yeah.
doesn't that falsely imply the author still holds that belief today? What if the field has completely moved on, or the author changed their mind?
That is a really fair question. But in academic writing, you aren't describing the author's current biological state of mind. You are describing the text itself.
Oh, I see.
The text from 1995 still exists, and it is still making that argument right now, on the page, every single time someone reads it. The idea is currently alive in the literature.
That's a great way to think about it.
And using the present tense for arguments gives your writing this immediate authoritative punch.
Okay, so a beautifully constructed matrix and flawless grammar are great, but if you are building a structurally sound house out of rotten wood, it's still going to collapse.
Oh, definitely.
Which brings us to a major quality control problem, the actual sources we are choosing to synthesize. A brilliantly written paragraph is totally useless if the studies you're synthesizing are fundamentally flawed.
Sourcing blind spots are fatal. You can have perfect synthesis of garbage data, and you are still left with garbage.
And there is this incredible anecdote in the source material that perfectly illustrates this. I have to share it. It's called the spinach myth.
This is such a wild story.
Right, so for decades, literal generations of people, including doctors and nutritionists, believed that spinach was this unbelievable miracle source of iron. Like Popeye the Sailor Man ate cans of it to get super strong.
And it turns out that entire cultural belief stems from a simple mathematical calculation error made by a scientist in the 19th century.
Yes. He misplaced a decimal point when measuring the iron content in spinach, making it seem 10 times higher than it actually was.
And the reason that error survived for so long really highlights the danger of relying on secondary sources.
Because nobody went back to check the math.
Exactly. Subsequent researchers didn't go back and check the original 19th century data. They just blindly cited the people who cited the guy who made the mistake.
It is a literal academic game of telephone. When you quote what author B said about author A's work, you inherit every oversimplification, misinterpretation, or outright error that author B made.
And worse, you propagate it to the next person who reads your work. You have to be an academic detective. If you read a great summary of a theory in a new paper, do not cite that summary. Go to the reference list, track down the original primary paper, read it for yourself, and cite the primary source.
So, okay, if we are hunting down primary sources, we have to talk about striking the right balance in bibliography. If I want to show my examiner or my boss that I am on the cutting edge, shouldn't I just stick to the absolute newest stuff? Like,
Yeah.
if I cite things from 20 years ago, don't I look out of date?
Doing that creates a massive historical blind spot. Your literature review needs to demonstrate two things simultaneously.
Which are?
First, you need seminal works. These are the foundational landmark papers that originally put your topic on the map. If you omit those, examiners will assume you are poorly read and just don't understand the genesis of your field.
Right, like you can't write a paper on relativity and just forget to mention Einstein because the paper is quote-unquote too old.
Exactly. But on the flip side, if you only cite historical classics, your literature review is basically just a history book. It doesn't reflect the modern state of the art.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. You are grounding your theory in the seminal classics, but anchoring your arguments in contemporary findings, which is usually defined as research published within the last 5 years.
Okay, but even if you perfectly balance the classics with the last 5 years, the sources point out a massive structural flaw in how most of us search for those contemporary findings. We are all trained to only look at peer-reviewed journals.
Which introduces severe publication bias.
Because academic publishing is notoriously slow.
We're so slow. From the moment a researcher finishes a study to the moment it actually appears in a peer-reviewed commercial database, it can take months or even years. It goes through endless rounds of revisions and editor approvals.
So if you are researching a fast-moving field like artificial intelligence or cryptocurrency or pandemic response, a peer-reviewed paper might be completely obsolete by the time the ink even dries.
Precisely. Furthermore, peer-reviewed journals have this inherent bias toward positive findings. They want to publish exciting breakthroughs.
Of course, it gets citations.
Right. They very rarely publish null results, which are studies where a researcher tested a hypothesis and it simply didn't work. But knowing what doesn't work is just as vital to understanding a field as knowing what does.
And this is where the sources push us towards something called gray literature, which I was fascinated by because it basically means stepping outside traditional commercial publishing entirely.
Yes, gray literature is incredibly valuable.
You're talking about government white papers, reputable industry reports from organizations like the World Bank or McKinsey, and completed master's and PhD dissertations from other universities that just haven't been turned into books yet.
Bringing in gray literature proves to an examiner that you are engaged with the real world. You aren't just trapped in an ivory tower reading dusty journals. You are seeing how these theories play out in global policy and industry right now.
But how do we trust it? I mean, if a think tank or a consulting firm publishes a report and it hasn't gone through the rigorous peer review process, how do I know it's not just corporate marketing or politically motivated spin?
Well, you apply your own rigorous vetting methodology. If a think tank publishes a report on renewable energy, you don't just blindly accept their executive summary.
You have to dig deeper.
You look at the appendix. Did they publish their raw data? Are their funding sources transparent? Do they clearly outline their methodology?
And if it's a black box where they just say, trust us.
You throw it out. You treat gray literature with higher skepticism, but you do not ignore it.
Got it. And regardless of whether you are pulling from peer-reviewed databases or gray literature, you cannot begin without a systematic search strategy.
No, absolutely not.
If you just type keywords into Google Scholar until you find 10 papers that magically agree with your personal hypothesis, you are cherry-picking.
Yeah.
You will inevitably ignore contradictory evidence, and a smart examiner will spot that confirmation bias instantly. You need a search plan that is objective and replicable.
Meaning you document your exact search terms, the databases you used, and the date you searched so that anyone else could recreate your results.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture here. We have our perfectly synthesized paragraphs written horizontally from our matrix.
Yep.
We have pristine primary sources. We've balanced the seminal classics with the last 5 years. We've bypassed publication bias by bringing in vetted gray literature. We have done everything mechanically right. But What is the actual destination of all this work?
And this is where we see the most heartbreaking mistake of all.
Heartbreaking.
Truly. Imagine someone writes a flawless, beautifully synthesized critical review of 100 papers. It is an absolute masterpiece of analysis.
Okay, sounds great so far.
And then they reach the end of the chapter, and their grand conclusion is basically, in conclusion, many intelligent people have written extensively about this topic, and the existing literature is highly comprehensive.
Oh. They just kind of trail off into a polite compliment.
Yes.
I mean, I kind of understand the impulse. You feel like you are standing on the shoulders of giants, so academic politeness suggests you should praise the existing research.
But if you conclude that the existing literature is comprehensive and everyone did a perfect job, you have just argued yourself out of a degree.
Because there's nothing left to do.
Exactly. If every previous paper is perfect and the literature is truly complete, there's absolutely no room for your research to exist. The whole point of the literature review is not to show off how much you read.
What is the point then?
The point is to find the research gap.
The gap, the hole in the current knowledge. If you don't find the hole, your entire thesis or your entire corporate proposal basically has no reason to exist.
None at all.
You have to prove that while the giants have broad shoulders, there is a blind spot they cannot see, and your work is going to illuminate it.
And our sources offer a really fantastic visual framework for structuring this argument. They call it the funnel and the bridge.
The funnel and the bridge. So think of a physical funnel, wide at the top, narrow at the bottom. At the top of your literature review, you start broad. You establish the general context and the history of the problem.
This is where those seminal works live.
Right. Then, as you move down to the middle of the funnel, you narrow the focus. You dive into specific themes, competing methodologies, and clashing debates.
And this is where the synthesis matrix is doing all the heavy lifting, showing exactly how the authors disagree.
Yeah. And then you reach the very bottom of the funnel. You zero in on the specific gap.
Which could be a lot of things. Maybe it's a methodological gap like everyone used surveys, but no one did qualitative interviews to get the emotional context.
Or maybe a contextual gap. The theory was proven in the United States, but it has never been tested in emerging markets in Southeast Asia.
Or maybe a specific demographic population was entirely ignored by all the previous studies.
You pinpoint the exact real estate where your research is going to build its house. Which brings us to the bridge.
The bridge is crucial.
The very end of your literature review must act as a bridge directly to your own research questions. It creates what examiners call the golden thread of your thesis.
The phrasing the sources suggest for this is incredibly clean. You basically write something like, while existing literature has extensively covered X and Y, there remains a critical lack of research regarding Z. Consequently, this study aims to address this gap by...
It is the ultimate justification for your work. Literally everything in the review exists merely to set up that single sentence.
It's all leading to that moment.
There is one final logistical trap here that we have to mention because it trips up even the best researchers. It's called the finish line fallacy.
Oh, this one is painful.
It happens when a student or an analyst treats the literature review as a checklist item in year one of their project. You spend 6 months agonizing over it. You finally get approval from your supervisor. You breathe a massive sigh of relief. You say, well, thank God that's over.
And then you never look at it again for 3 years while you do your actual experiments.
Which is a massive red flag.
Huge. Research is being published every single day. If you show up to your final academic defense and your examiner asks you about a major paradigm-shifting paper that came out 6 months ago, and your literature review only has sources from 3 years ago,
you are dead in the water.
You are totally dead in the water.
And this isn't just for PhDs either. If you wrote a comprehensive market analysis for your startup's investors 6 months ago, and you walk into a pitch meeting without knowing about a major competitor that launched yesterday, you're going to look completely incompetent.
The literature review has to be a living document.
So how do we keep it alive without losing our minds?
The most practical way to manage this without going crazy is to set up Google Scholar alerts for your specific key terms.
Just let the database do the monitoring for you.
Exactly. When a new paper is published in your niche, you get an automated email. You read the abstract, drop the key findings into your synthesis matrix, and update your draft. You keep doing this right up until the very day of submission.
Wow. Up to the day of submission. And, To maintain your sanity while constantly updating and shifting things around, the sources practically beg the reader to use citation managers from day one.
Zotero, Mendeley, whatever software you prefer.
Because we've all tried to manually number 150 citations in a Word document at 3 a.m., it is a nightmare.
Beyond just formatting your bibliography flawlessly in APA or Harvard style, a citation manager actually prevents something called thematic drift.
What's that?
Thematic drift happens when you're writing a paragraph about, say, supply chain logistics. But because you're staring at a disorganized Word document full of copy-pasted abstracts, you suddenly start writing about labor disputes just because the next author on your disorganized list mentioned it.
Oh, so you just sort of wander off topic.
Right. When you lose track of whose idea was whose, your arguments wander aimlessly. And worst of all, you risk accidental plagiarism because you cite the wrong author for a specific concept.
Nobody wants to deal with an accidental plagiarism charge.
Yeah.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive.
We really have.
If you are listening to this and you are about to submit a draft to your supervisor or your boss, we have a rapid-fire self-audit checklist for you to run through before you hit send. Are you ready? Ask yourself, are your sources grouped by theme in a matrix, or are you just lazily listing authors chronologically?
Have you explicitly stated the research gap, or did you just complement the existing literature and trail off?
Is at least 90% of the text in your own voice, or are you hiding behind giant block quotes?
Are your contemporary sources actually from the last 5 years?
Did you include high-quality gray literature to bypass publication bias?
Are your verb tenses consistent past tense for actions, present tense for ideas?
And finally, are your citations perfectly locked in with a manager? If you can hit all of those, you are in incredible shape.
Truly. But beneath all these tactics, there is a fundamental mindset shift that has to happen.
What's the shift?
You have to stop viewing the literature as a static, dead list of facts that you are being forced to memorize and report on. Instead, imagine it as a courtroom trial.
Ooh, I like this analogy.
You are the judge.
Yeah.
You are calling these different authors to the stand as expert witnesses to cross-examine their conflicting testimonies. Your job isn't to just transcribe what they say. Your job is to listen carefully, figure out where their testimonies overlap, where they contradict each other, and ultimately figure out what evidence is completely missing from the trial.
That is exactly the mindset you need. And it's worth reminding you that this framework doesn't just save academic degrees. If you are prepping for a corporate strategy meeting or even just doing a personal deep dive into a new investment opportunity, this is the exact same framework you use to become the smartest, most synthesized thinker in the room.
Absolutely. Don't just list what the blogs say. Build the matrix, find the gap, and build the bridge. It is a universal framework for rigorous critical thinking.
Well said. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something that builds on all this, but pushes it into the near future.
Let's hear it.
We talked about how the ultimate goal of a literature review is to transition from passive reading to active creation and to manually find that missing gap. But what happens to this entire process when the technology catches up?
With AI, you mean?
Yeah. Right now, we have AI tools that are beginning to instantly map the entire synthesis matrix for us in seconds. They can ingest 10,000 papers, identify the thematic columns, and highlight the contradictions instantly. So if the machine can find the gap for us, will the boss battle of tomorrow's researcher no longer be finding the hole in the literature, but rather figuring out how to ask the kinds of questions that a machine could never even conceptualize?
That is a fascinating thought. I mean, when synthesis becomes fully automated, human curiosity and the ability to ask the unaskable questions will become the most valuable currency we have.
Definitely something to mull over as you stare down your next pile of reading. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today. We'll catch you on the next one.